we're ready to mix up our starter, and I've measured out my starter on a scale that I've got underneath here, and I have 270 grams of starter. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix equal parts of flour and water, and I do this at every feeding. It gives you a really perfect artisan sourdough loaf. So I'm gonna measure out, and I know you can't see my scale, but it's gonna be 270 grams of flour, the exact amount of starter that I have. Almost there. Perfect. There we go. And then we are gonna do 270 grams of water. And I usually do a warm water, not too hot. You don't want your water hot at all because it will kill all that nice fermentation bacteria in the sourdough starter. But a nice warm water is perfect. It will get things active and bubbly really quickly. So I'm gonna do 270 grams of warm water. Almost. Perfect. All right, at this point, I have 270 grams of starter, 270 grams of flour, and 270 grams of water. So I have equal parts. It's called 100% hydration sourdough starter when you mix it like this with equal parts of everything. So I'm gonna just stir that and get it completely incorporated. Mine is typically the consistency of like a pancake dough, maybe a little bit wetter. But I'm gonna incorporate all of the flour and get it really, really, really well mixed in. The important thing when your sourdough starter is sitting and rising is that it stays at a maintained 75 to 85 degrees in your kitchen. So if your kitchen or your house tend to be a little bit chillier like mine, especially in the colder months of the year, I just turn my oven on its lowest setting, and I will set my starter next to my oven or sometimes on top of it if it really needs it, but I just pay really close attention that it's not getting too hot on the sides of my jar for the starter. So now I've got that all mixed together. I don't really have any big lumps, and so I'm going to get my glass mason jar that I keep my starter in, and I'm just going to go ahead and pour in all of my sourdough starter. And you definitely want to use a glass jar of any kind. I think mason jars are honestly probably the easiest thing to use. I have a wide mouth one that I got at Costco a while back that works perfectly, especially for the amount that I keep. If you're baking for yourself, really feeding only 100 grams of starter would be more than enough to make your bread just for your family. I keep a little bit more on hand because I do bake for other people too. So I've got my mixed up starter in the glass jar, and now what I like to do is just take any washable marker, and I will actually just mark on the side of the jar where my starter is starting out in the jar. That's another reason I like to use the glass jars. So now I'm just gonna put my lid really loosely on top. I don't close it on top at all. And I'm just gonna let it sit. And it takes typically about 4 hours for my starter to be at peak and ready to bake with. So we mixed the starter, and about an hour before the starter peaks, I'm gonna mix up the auto lice. By mixing the flour and the water about an hour before you mix in the sourdough starter, it gets the gluten strands forming in the dough. So I do 455 grams of flour on my scale, and then I add in, after I clear that out, I add in 325 grams of water to start with. We'll add in a little bit more later when we add the sourdough starter, but for now we're just gonna put in 325 grams, 324, that's close enough. So with the flour and the water, now I'm just gonna mix this together until it is just in a nice little doughy ball and it gets really sticky. So I start it with a spatula, but sometimes I do have to finish it with my hands to get it into a nice little dough ball. So just make sure all the flour gets incorporated. I scrape the sides of the bowl. And basically just mix this into a perfect little dough ball, and then you'll cover it with a tea towel and you'll just sit it for an hour to get the gluten strands forming, and that's gonna help your overall loaf have a really nice artisan look. So get this in a nice little dough ball, and we'll cover it and leave it for an hour. Auto lice has been sitting for an hour, and my starter has peaked, so it's time to add that in. So we're gonna add in 10 grams of salt first to the autolyse. And then we're gonna add in 20 more grams of water and 100 grams of the sourdough starter. So I'm gonna bring out my scale for this again and get it on grams. Here we go, this time I'll have it facing this way. All right, so I'm gonna clear that out, and we're gonna put in 100 grams of this nice, bubbly, beautiful starter, which for me winds up being about 1 whole ladle full. I just kind of scrape it out. Let's see if we get close there. I need a little bit more. And you can go up to about 110 grams of starter. It's no problem, but you don't want to go over that. All right, it's hard measuring this backwards. I can't see it very well. Alrighty, so we have 107, so we're in between our 100 and 110 grams of starter, so I can get the scale out of the way. And at this point, this is a no-knead recipe, so you're never really gonna knead the bread, but this is kind of the closest you're gonna get to kneading it. So I just use my hands and I kind of pull around the bowl and tuck in. And you're gonna get really messy, but you just basically wanna get the starter and the salt and the water completely incorporated. And you can already see like that your gluten strands have already started forming in that autolyse, because when you pull it in like this, you get a nice tight edge on the outsides of the dough. So I've pretty much got all of that incorporated. So I'm gonna actually remove the dough from the bowl at this point, and I'm gonna do a slap and fold. So you just kind of slap it on the counter and fold it over. And this is, again, just helping get those gluten strands really tight. You can see how tight they are around the edge. Even though this is a really wet, relaxed dough, your gluten is already forming perfectly. So you just want to do that a few times to kind of get it in a perfect, tight little dough ball. And then you're going to stick it back in your bowl. And at this point, you're going to leave it for 2 hours worth of rise time, but every 30 minutes, you're going to come back to it, and we're going to do stretch and folds, and I will show you what that is after our first 30 minutes. So you probably remember how tight that dough ball was when we put it in the bowl, and in just the first 30 minutes, it has relaxed a whole bunch, and you're going to notice that after every 30-minute increment when we go to stretch and fold. So you're going to want to get your hands nice and wet in your sink to do the stretch and fold, and this is how we do that. So you're gonna start on one side of it, and you just kind of pull up, and you're literally just gonna stretch the dough straight up, and it'll stretch pretty far, and then fold it over. Do a quarter turn. Okay, you're gonna stretch again, and each time you stretch it and fold it, you're gonna notice that it's getting tight into that dough ball again. At this point, I usually pick it up and I kind of like stretch it out myself like this. Just gently tugging, a little shaking, and we're getting that firm dough back again. So we've got it into a dough ball. I stretched it, and I did 1 full cycle of 4 stretch and folds, but you can do more if you feel like your dough is still too loose. So again, we're gonna cover it and wait another 30 minutes. All right, a second 30 minutes has passed in our first 2 hours of rise time. And so now I'm gonna go ahead and add in what I want in my bread. You don't have to add anything, but there are so many good flavor combinations. I roasted some garlic earlier, a whole head of garlic. So I'm gonna add roasted garlic and Parmesan to my loaf today. And about a solid half cup, maybe a little more Parmesan, and then 1 whole roasted head of garlic goes into my loaves. And then we're just gonna do another set of the stretch and fold. So, let me get my hands wet first real quick. Otherwise we will have a sticky mess. So I'm just gonna pull up, stretch the dough. And yeah, it seems like everything's falling down, but that's okay. You can kind of kick it back in and fold, stretch and fold. Garlic Parmesan is definitely one of my most popular flavor combinations. That, along with jalapeno cheddar, is a huge favorite. Cranberry and walnut is always good. If you have any of the good toppings fall out, just kind of tuck them up underneath there as you wrap the ball around. So we just completed the second set of the stretch and fold, and we have a nice tight dough ball again. So we're gonna let it sit with a tea towel over it for another 30 minutes and do another stretch and fold, another 30 minutes and do the final stretch and fold. So there's our first 2 hours of rise time. Again, with those 4 stretch and folds every 30 minutes. After the 4th stretch and fold, you're gonna cover it with a tea towel and let it rest for 2 full hours without touching it at all. And that will be your longer bench rest time. And then we'll come back to the dough at that point. Okay, so we are ready now. Our dough has been resting for 2 hours. What we are gonna do is one final stretch and fold, so with wet hands again, and you'll notice the dough definitely is a lot thicker and fluffier as it's been rising this last couple of hours. So we are gonna stretch and fold one last set, or until the dough feels thick enough, and actually about 3 is gonna be enough for this dough. Now I'm gonna set the bowl off to the side, and I'm gonna go ahead and flour my counter surface and lay this dough down. Now we're gonna go ahead and form a perfectly shaped bowl, and so I use my right hand to swirl it around, and then I tuck under the edges with both of my hands. So we're just gonna keep forming it like that, and this is also pushing up all the air into the bread really nicely too. Now, if you have a bread proofing basket, that's awesome. I went ahead and I coated my bread proofing basket with a really nice thick coat of flour. This is gonna keep it from sticking when I get ready to turn this out in the morning. And I'm just gonna set my bread right inside there. I'm gonna put the cover on it. Now, if you don't have a bread proofing basket, you can just coat the bowl that you were using with flour in the same way, just a nice thick coat of flour, and then set your bread on there back in the bowl. But I went ahead and put it in my bread proofing basket. These are nice just because they allow a lot more air to come in the sides of the bread, so which is helpful in helping it rise. Now that this is in here, I'm gonna stick it in the refrigerator overnight, and we will be baking it in the morning. So we have our bread that's been proofing in the refrigerator all night long, and you're just gonna invert that, and I usually have to give it a good tap. Now, if you did it in a bowl, you're probably going to need to gently lift out your loaf and set it out if your bowl's really deep. Flipping it over might not work super well. And now I'm just gonna go ahead and rub the flour so it's evenly distributed over the top of the bread. You do not have to do this. If you don't wanna score the bread or have a pretty design, then this doesn't matter. You can just leave those cool stripes that the proofing basket leaves on there. Or you can gently spread the flour across the bread, and we're gonna go ahead and score the bread now. So I have a bread scoring tool that you can use. You can also get these really inexpensively on Amazon if you don't have one. And I will usually just do, I really like the line look around the edge, so I'll do some scoring like this. It makes it look like almost a really pretty leaf design. And then I like doing just kind of a cross one over the middle. And then I'm gonna go ahead and turn it this way, and I'm going to score the same design but the other direction that I did on the other side. And there we go.